Gradients in PowerPoint can be beautiful and modern, but the default one often look dated unless you tweak them. In this video, we will look at some practical methods and tips to generate gradients that look like they came from Figma or Photoshop rather than the 90s PowerPoint presets. Gradients are powerful, but they are not for every situation. They work best when you want to, number one, add depth or dimension to your content. When you want your content to pop off the slide, gradients are a great resource in your toolkit. Let's look at this example. This is about website traffic by device type. On the y-axis, we have page views, and on the x-axis, we have number of weeks. This looks fine, but we can make this better by adding a gradient like this. So here we have a gradient that goes from bottom to top. As we go from bottom to top, the color becomes hotter, indicating that the yellower the value, the hotter it is, which is a good thing in this case. Let's look at another example. We have a quote inside a speech bubble. This looks flat. We can make this better by adding a gradient and a shadow at the back. Number two, we can use gradients to create visual focus. So let's consider this example. We have this speed dial or a gauge. This looks flat right now because we have used a dull gray color. We can make this better by turning this into a spectrum-like gradient like this. And this clearly tells us which values are hotter, which ones are green. So it helps bring focus to your graphic and the content we have on this slide. Number three, gradients are commonly used to modernize a flat background. Here we have a SWOT analysis for a fictitious company called Healthy Bites. We can improve this slide by adding a gradient background using teal color. So here you will notice we have a lighter teal, and on this side we have this shade of a blue color or blue-green. So this is before, this is after. Here is another example. Let's assume that this is a capability slide for a clinic. So we have this plain blue background and we have an image of a doctor. We can make this better by turning this blue background into a gradient like so. We have this diagonal gradient that goes from a lighter blue in the top left corner to a darker blue in the bottom right corner. We can make this even better by adding a shadow at the back of this image here. And with just these two changes, the slide comes alive. Number four, we can use gradients to show transition or progress. Let's take an example of this product preferences scale. Here on the left end, we have lower than expected values. Then we have average values, and on the right, we have higher values. We can clearly improve this by turning this into a spectrum like we saw previously, like so. Here is one more example where we have a simple two-step process diagram. We can improve this by using a gradient instead of a flat color. And finally, for the fifth reason, we can use gradients to just stylize for visual impact. This is not needed, but it's nice to have. So for example, we have this simple slide with a gray bar on the left-hand side. We can turn this gray bar into a gradient like so to just stylize the slide and bring interest to it. Another example is we can turn a simple flat chart into a gradient like so, where on one end we have a solid color. On the other end, we have used a neutral color like white as an anchor. So those are some of the key reasons why we might want to use gradients. Having said that, one caveat I have for you is for data heavy slides like dashboards, I would recommend you avoid gradients because the more important thing for such slides is the clarity instead of aesthetics. Adding too many gradients can make it jarring for the viewers. With that out of the way, let's look at how to make them look good. Here, I'm not going to be covering the basics of gradients in PowerPoint. I have covered that in my video about mastering shapes. I will leave a link to that video in the description. Go to the 12-minute timestamp and you can check out the basics of gradients in PowerPoint. Here, my focus will be on the aesthetics of gradients rather than the mechanics of it. A few limitations of PowerPoint's gradient tool are: number one, if you go to the gradient fill menu, you will notice that we have four types of gradients: linear, radial, rectangular, and path. What's missing are mesh gradients, conic gradients, or freeform gradient mapping that you find in image editing softwares like Photoshop, Affinity Photo, and so on. Just to clarify what are conic gradients and mesh gradients, This is what a conic gradient looks like. So it's essentially a circular gradient. Like imagine you are looking at a cone from top. So you will have a center and around that you will have a circle. In this case, the center lies here. From here, we go around the circle using a gradient. This is what a mesh gradient looks like. A mesh gradient has multiple colors and source points. So here you will notice that we have a yellow gradient going on here. There is a purple one. Blue here, there is one more color here. This is a complicated gradient which you cannot get in PowerPoint easily. Number two, we have limited color models in PowerPoint. As I covered before, we only have RGB and HSL color spaces in PowerPoint, but there are far more color spaces out there, especially modes like LCH, JCH, HSB, and so on. Some of these are fine-tuned to how we perceive colors. So they are a lot smoother and they avoid the banding effect that you typically see in gradients. Number three, when it comes to radial gradient type in PowerPoint, we have a bunch of presets of where this source point can lie. One is at the center, and there are 4 more presets which allow us to move this center in these 4 corners. Other than that, you have no control over where you want to place this center. So if you wanted to place this here, there is no easy way to do this. Number 4, have a look at this gradient which uses 2 colors. On the left we have a blue color and on the right we have an orange, but in the center we have this dead gray zone. This is a problem of the interpolation that the PowerPoint's gradient tool uses. It's difficult to get around this. There is a workaround to get rid of or reduce the gray zone here, but because we are only limited to 2 color spaces or modes here, by default you are much more likely to get a dead gray zone. Number 5, the interface for PowerPoint's gradient tool is really primitive. It hasn't changed in ages, and it's not really intuitive to use when coming up with good gradients. So because of all these limitations, it is really hard to get good gradients in PowerPoint. To get beautiful gradients, we have to look outside of PowerPoint. I have a great tool for you. So go to this URL, which I'll cover next. Next, let's run an exercise where we create a gradient using PowerPoint's gradient tool and the gradient tool generator that I just showed you for the same 2 colors. So first, let's do this for PowerPoint. I've selected my first color, then click on your shape, click on gradient fill. Let's clean up all these extra pins. We just need 2 pins. For the left-hand side, I'm going to paste my color 1. Click OK, then copy color 2, select your shape, paste your color for the right hand side, click OK. We need to rotate our gradient so that blue is on the left hand side and yellow is on the right hand side. Making this 0 degrees will fix this. So this is our gradient using PowerPoint's gradient tool. Now next, let's look at the same gradient using this gradient generator tool. So this is where you paste your colors. So this is our color 1. It's exactly the same. This is our color 2. Next, you select the gradient type. In this case, we just want a gradient in the straight line. So linear is fine. Interpolation method is the color mode or model, similar to RGB or HSL that we saw in PowerPoint. Here you get 8 interpolation methods to choose from. HSL comes close to the PowerPoint's gradient tool. You can check all of these. So let's select all of them one by one, and you will see they all give us different results. LCH is the default one, and for most cases this should work. LCH stands for, I think L is for luminance, C is for chroma, and H is for hue. If you scroll down, you will find the definitions of all of these. Let's stick to the default. Next, you have the interpolation direction. Now consider a color wheel. In a circle, distance between 2 points would be closer on one side and longer on the other side. So that's what this short and long is. If you choose long, it would pick colors in the other direction. Short is fine for us. Next one is angle, which is similar to PowerPoint's angle. And then we have easing. You can ignore cubic because it's rarely useful for us. And the last option we have is precision, which decides how many colors you want filled between the 2 colors, like this blue and yellow, how many colors do you want to fill in between these two? So the higher the precision, the smoother your gradient will be. If we crank this all the way to 0, this would look very similar to what we have in PowerPoint. I'm happy with a precision of up to this much. Now, if you want to use this gradient in PowerPoint, you just have to export this SVG, then open that SVG in PowerPoint. Click on Convert to Shape. You will see that we have all these gradient stops on the right hand side. You can click on your shape, then double click on Format Painter, click on your shape, and we have our gradient using the Gradient Generator tool. You will notice there is a night and day difference between the gradient quality using PowerPoint's gradient tool versus this Gradient Generator tool. So it's very powerful, and I guarantee you that you will always get good results using this generator tool. So highly recommend this. Next, I want to share with you 10 tips to get consistently beautiful gradients. Number 1, stick to up to 3 colors maximum when creating gradients. We saw an example with 2 gradient colors, but you can go up to 3 colors, but anything beyond that would be counterproductive because too many colors add messiness. This is an example you saw earlier. Here we have used 3 colors, but if you were to add one more color, you would get a messy result like this. So avoid using more than 3 colors for gradients. Number 2, analogous colors work the best. So colors next to each other on the color wheel, for example, blue or teal, orange or pink. The adjacent colors work the best when creating gradients. Here I have an example for you where I have used blue color and teal color, and they look really smooth because they do share position next to each other on the color wheel. So it's only natural that they get along well in the gradient format. Number 3, try light to dark of the same color or hue. This is an example you saw earlier where on the left hand side we have a darker shade of this teal, and on the right hand side we have a lighter shade of the same color. Using this technique is simple for us because we are using essentially just one color. It also looks elegant and it always works. So use this to create depth without being distracting. Number 4, experiment with complementary colors. So complementary colors are the opposite colors. So here blue is opposite of this orange, so this is a complementary pair. Violet is opposite to this yellow color, so that's another pair, and so on. One word of caution is because they are opposite to each other, they tend to create harsh boundaries. One tip to reduce this harshness is to create subdued tones of these two colors. So don't use full saturation, just tone them down. So this gradient is ideal when we have callouts or when we want to emphasize shapes. One example could be the speech bubble here or a chart. Number 5, use neutrals as anchors. So pair a bold color with a neutral like teal with white or purple with gray. It makes designs feel cleaner and easier on the eye. So it's best for slide backgrounds with text on top or charts. Here is a slide. We have no background right now. If we were to use a subtle background with neutrals as an anchor, we could get an effect like this. So on this left hand side, we have a tint of yellow from this image, and on the right hand side we have this neutral white. Number 6, consider emotional impact when we create gradients depending on the context of your slide. So if the slide is about growth, positivity, you might want to use green gradient. If it's about creativity, you might want to use purple. If you want to project energy or urgency, use orange red. So pick colors that match the mood of your content. Number 7, borrow from nature. Gradients exist everywhere in nature. The best example is the blue sky. Also, the ocean has the teal or deep blue gradients going all over. Then forest has green to earthy brown. So here I have 3 examples for you. The left one mimics the sunrise, this mimics the ocean, and this one goes from earthy green to brown. These are naturally harmonious and people are subconsciously drawn to them. So look around you, you might just find your next gradient from nature. Number 8, contrast and subtlety. So keep your contrast low for backgrounds with text on it. A soft blend keeps the text readable. Take this example from my video about first principles. If we add a background like this, it keeps our content as is, but it just adds a slight subtle background to improve its looks. Next, use higher contrast for shapes. So things like arrows, buttons, bars, things like that can benefit from a stronger gradient. So let's take the same example. If we apply gradients to arrows and these rectangular shapes, we could get an effect like this. So just a subtle improvement without distracting from the content. Number 9, direction and light. Diagonal gradients at 45-degree angles bring a dynamic and modern feel to your content. Vertical gradients, which go from either top to bottom or bottom to top, can create natural light and shadow effects, while radial gradients are great for highlights and glowing effects. Here I have this gradient that mimics a sunrise, while here this center out gradient creates this 3D effect for our circle and makes it look like a sphere. Number 10, balance. Gradients should support, not distract. Use them sparingly, maybe 1 or 2 gradients per slide at the most, or just sprinkle them throughout your presentations. You don't have to repeat them for every single slide. So for example, this is a bad way to use gradients where it's really distracting from these points. Instead, if you just add this gradient to the background, it can create a much better look and feel for your slide. So if you keep all these tips in mind and use the gradient generator tool, I guarantee you will be able to create beautiful gradients every single time. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe for future videos, and I will catch you next time.